start, I would not be welcome back in the 865, Stephen, if I don't start with Florida, Tennessee. So, right out the gate, I just want to ask you this. I don't know if you've even considered this at all, but Billy Napier, Josh Heupel, who do you think, is the better coach, and which team will have the coaching edge, so to speak, in Saturday's matchup?
Oh man, I can already see like getting message boarded on this one, or like, I think as far as SEC play, you would probably have to give the edge to Josh Heupel. I mean, he's got a year of experience on Billy Napier. I think if we were to do a national coach rankings coming into this year, I think just overall Napier probably would have ranked ahead of Heupel because he was more accomplished at Louisiana, and certainly when he took over at Louisiana, it was a program that wasn't necessarily in great shape, and they got better each season. Won the Sun Belt in his last season, so I think they're pretty comparable. If I was to do a national ranking after week three, but as I think there's something to be said about having a year of SEC experience under your belt and Josh Heupel. So if I think I feel good about the future of both programs under Napier and Heupel.
Yeah, and speaking to your point, Stephen, now that they won on Saturday, even though it was a close call, Billy Napier now 18-3 in one score ball game. So certainly he's a heck of a coach too. But what do you make of the Florida Gators right now, Stephen? I mean, like I said, I mean that was an ugly, ugly game against South Florida. They were 24-point favorite, I believe, and they barely won that game by 3 points, was it? I believe, and a lot of that came down to I don't know turnovers on both sides of the both teams had massive turnovers in that game. But Anthony Richardson, man, we were all well, I shouldn't say all of us, but many of us, myself included, was jumping on, all the hype and all the Heisman talk and all that. And his performance has just fallen off a cliff the last couple of weeks. How big of a surprise is that to you after what we saw the Gators do to Utah?
I am surprised. I didn't expect him to have that similar performance that he had against Utah every week. But I also thought that he would throw for more than 200 yards and would certainly, I think, take a step forward from where he was last year. And so I think coming into this year, I think it was pretty clear that there was a lot of upside, but there were also some questions. And I think maybe the questions for Anthony Richardson go beyond the quarterback, too. I think there's a fair question of how deep is Florida's receiving core, also how many of those guys are getting open downfield. It doesn't seem like to me that Florida has the field stretchers that we're used to seeing when we think of Florida, especially over the last 10 or 15 years. So I think some of it certainly is on him. He's going to have to play better. I think the personnel around him, especially a receiver, is going to have to step up. I think the other problem that Florida has, and Mike, if you feel free to call me out on this one. I think you have to let Anthony Richardson be Anthony Richardson, and that is you have to let him run, especially in a game like this against Tennessee. Like your best chance is to play the time of possession and control the pace of the game, because if Tennessee controls this and they get out ahead early, and Hendon Hooker and those receivers are throwing and connecting on those big shots, Florida's going to be in trouble because of the way that the pace of this game and the way they've not been able to score this year. So I know the backup situation is iffy, but you got to let Richardson be Richardson if you want to have a chance to win this game.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that gets lost in the shuffle of that Kentucky loss. I mean, Kentucky's got some outstanding linebackers, and I know Aaron Beasley for Tennessee, he's playing the best football he's ever played. Jeremy Banks is a tackling machine. I'm not trying to discredit those guys, but I don't think they're as good as the linebackers at Kentucky, and I don't know how well they match up if they're going to be asked to spy Anthony Richardson. So that certainly could be a little advantage to the Florida Gators if they let Anthony Richardson run. That's going to be one of the keys to the game. But in my mind, Stephen, I'm curious to get your thoughts. The biggest key to this football game is going to be Florida's ability to run the ball. That's where Billy Napier, that's what his program is essentially built on. Offensive line, they've improved dramatically. They've got Montrell Johnson, breakout star there from Louisiana. Now he's one of the top rushers in the SEC, and of course the freshman sensation ETN. If they win in Rocky Top, it's going to be because those two have a big day. What are your thoughts on that?
100% agree with you. I think the key to Florida's chances of winning on Saturday really comes down to establishing the ground game. If Tennessee gets Florida in third and long situations, Florida can't run, the game is over. If Florida is able to run the ball and they're able to control time and possession, I think they got a shot to win this game. I mean, you can take a look at like the plays that these two teams have run. Tennessee's run 233 and Florida's run 176 this year. Florida wants a low play, kind of slow kind of style game on Saturday. You mentioned that stat on Billy Napier. This is his specialty, shorten the game, find a way to win in one score games. Also, I think if I'm Florida, I want to see more of ETN and Johnson in the backfield. I think those two guys are the best backs that Florida has. So I think if Tennessee can stop the run, Florida's in real trouble. If Florida gets the ground game going early on, then we have a much closer toss up than that 10-point spread would indicate going into Saturday's game.
Now, flipping to the other side, Stephen, Tennessee, they've had a little struggles running the ball, I think is fair to say. Certainly against the Pitt game, they really got overmatched by Pitt's defensive front. But you could tell me better than I could how good that line is. Do you think Tennessee will be able to run on a Florida defense, which has some star power? But again, I mean, the holes were massive against South Florida, and certainly Tennessee, I gotta think, has got better offensive line and running backs than South Florida.
I think that's the mystery for last week for Florida. I mean, South Florida came into the year projected, I think, by us at Athlon Sports to have 3-4 kind of wins. They're not one of the top teams in the American Athletic Conference unless they're just drastically better than we thought coming into this year. So I think it was surprising to see how South Florida moved the ball on Saturday. I did not expect them to be able to just move up and down the field like they were. And also their passing game is very inconsistent too. So, there wasn't like they had kind of a multi-dimensional attack there. They were able to move the ball on the ground. Florida's played Utah. They've also played Kentucky, and those are very physical kind of run first opponents. And Kentucky had success as the game went on because I think they were able to wear down Florida's front too. So I don't think that Tennessee necessarily needs to have 200 rushing yards to win this game. I think it's going to be more about keeping Hendon Hooker upright in the pocket, keep the Florida rushers away from him. To your point, when they played Pitt, Pitt's a much better defensive line than the one that Florida has coming into this year. So I think if Tennessee can protect, there will be opportunities for Hendon Hooker and Cedric Tillman and McCoy and the other receivers for Tennessee to get on track.
How surprised were you, Florida? It seemed like they were often out of position or just making poor decisions on the defensive side against South Florida. It just seemed, this is not once or twice, but it was maybe a dozen times where they were just filling the wrong gap or just completely busted coverage. How big of a concern is that going into this matchup? Because you already hit on it. Tennessee's going to run a million plays. They're going to try to go as fast as they can. Florida's depth is already a huge concern. This is potentially a really, really bad matchup, I would think, for Florida's defense, the way they're playing right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think the depth coming into the season up front along the defensive line was a concern of mine. And of course, they've been a little bit banged up. Ventrell Miller was hurt early on in the season. So, just they can't really afford to lose a lot of their playmakers and top guys on defense. And that you said it best there. I mean, Tennessee's offense is hard to rep for in practice because of the pace that they run and the amount of plays they go. Because once they get that first down, you can see it. They're already setting up the shot downfield. So if you're out of position, and it was surprising to see that against South Florida, then it's going to be a real problem against Tennessee, which is a much better offense. If you want to take the most optimistic and most generous kind of scenario in that is South Florida has a new offensive coordinator. They have a new quarterback. They've only played 2 games before that. Maybe Florida was looking ahead a little bit to Tennessee. So if you want to make the most generous interpretation of what happened on defense, that's probably where I would start. But we knew coming into the season that this was not a vintage shutdown Florida defense. So I do think it's fair to wonder Tennessee from a pace perspective, if they push it, if we see some of those kind of busted plays that Florida had last week, we see that again for Tennessee on Saturday.
How many cramps, we'll call it, do you think Florida will pull in this game?
Probably quite a few, I would say. I mean, if you're Florida, you have to do everything you can to slow down Tennessee. So Yeah, I would say some injuries are probably going to happen.
Now, do you buy into, and this is not exclusive to Tennessee by any means, but, maybe we've seen it with Michigan and Ohio State, and I'm sure you could probably think of a handful of others, but do you buy into the psychology of this matchup, Shane? I believe it's 16 out of the last 17. Florida has won this ball game, and I don't care who the coach is. They come in here, they say, "Yeah, this is just another game." Yada yada yada, and then whatever happened on Saturday, it's like some damn voodoo has taken over Tennessee. Do you buy into that, or do you believe Josh Heupel? I don't know if you've seen it, but he's basically saying we weren't here for that. Most of these players weren't here for that. That's not on us. Where do you lie on something like that?
It's a great question because last year, you had Tennessee was just getting started, of course, under Josh Heupel, change of quarterback. Florida at that point still seemed to be okay under Dan Mullen, and then things kind of drastically changed for both programs later in the season. I think there is something sort of a psychology in these rivalries. I mean, you mentioned it. Florida has just dominated this rivalry. I mean, I think Tennessee, like you said, Tennessee's won one of the last 16. But the other thing that stands out to me is most of the victories in this series recently, whoever wins, it's usually a double-digit victory. There's not many close games. But I think the takeaway that I have in this matchup is there's a kind of a term that we kind of use in college football, which is the moment, and it's like everything aligns for a team on Saturday. It is the atmosphere. You're getting your rival at home. It's a huge opportunity for Tennessee. Florida's walking in a little bit wobbly because of what's happened this year and also just where they were coming into the season. So Florida's wobbling and everything's lining up for Tennessee. They've been the better team. They've got more momentum. They're at home. They should win this game. They've got the better quarterback. Like everything aligns for Tennessee. So I don't know if I necessarily read too much into the the history is not going to matter for my prediction on Saturday. It may matter for the spread purposes, but to me, everything aligns the right way if you're a Tennessee fan on Saturday.
Well, I guarantee you, Stephen, if the game is tied going into the fourth quarter, the Florida Gators are going to win. That's just me speaking from living this rivalry for the last couple of decades. But let me ask you this: something I almost forgot to ask you. Cedric Tillman, a little banged up against Akron, had to leave the field. They're being very tight-lipped, as you would imagine, going into this matchup. If he doesn't play, obviously that's huge. He may be the best receiver in the SEC. I don't think that's too bold of a statement. But do you still think that Tennessee would have an advantage with their offense going up against Florida's secondary if Tillman cannot go in this ball game?
It gets easier to defend without Tillman because, like you mentioned, I mean, he's one of the best receivers in college football. And also, I think he and Hendon Hooker are so perfect for this offense because they can push the ball downfield. And Hendon Hooker is very good at downfield accuracy. Now, it seemed like he may have been a little bit off at times this year, but I'm not worried if I'm a Tennessee fan at this point. And also, Tillman plays the role in this offense well, so it gets easier to defend. But I think if you're Tennessee, the most encouraging thing is Jalen Hyatt's playing well. Brew McCoy's stepped up too, so you have a very good 2 and 3. We came into the year wondering about who would step up. Can Jalen Hyatt have that breakout year? All signs it looks like that Tennessee's fine at receiver. So I still think that this game comes down to whether or not Florida can run and whether or not Anthony Richardson is Anthony Richardson. I think if Tennessee misses Tillman, it gets easier to defend, but I still would take Tennessee in this game. I just gave a prediction, so
Hey, no, we love it. All right, I just never want to put you on the spot here on a Monday evening. That's why I never asked. But we got another